All right, thank you again, Elder Kenote. And now I have the honor and privilege of introducing our guest for the evening, an Indigenous scholar, writer, mother, and scientist beloved not just here in our communities, but around the world. Dr. Robinwall Kimmerer, an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, Dr. Kimmerer is a distinguished teaching professor of environmental biology at the State University of New York, the founder and director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, and author of multiple books, including Braiding Sweetgrass. She has a special connection to this part of the world, having spent time working with the Menominee Nation and several of the folks here in the room. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kimmerer.
Annie, bonjour, poso. So glad to be with you. Shabadas gegish kokwe nedeshnakas, bodwe wad mi kwenda, megaze dodem minwa mako dodem. Shishibanyek nebendegwes, Syracuse, New York, nudach bia, mikwech kinigego gamijang. And in our beautiful Potawatomi language, of which I am just a beginner, I give you all my heartfelt greetings. Tell you that my name in my language is Shabadas Gegish Kokwe, the light shining through, sky woman. I am a member of the Bear Clan and also of the Eagles, and I'm so grateful to be here with you. I also want to say how wonderful it feels to be back in Wisconsin, to be in the homelands and to see some of my friends from CMN. I would say that one of the most remarkable and fulfilling years as a scholar was the one that I spent at CMN on sabbatical, and I learned so much, and it means the world to me to see you all here. And just yesterday I was at Oneida Nation having a wonderful visit, and tomorrow I go over to La Crosse to visit with our Ho-Chunk relatives. So this is a great tour to Wisconsin. And I want to, I forgot I had slides. There we go. I also want to remember that in our way, we always begin with gratitude, not only for one another and this opportunity to be together, but could we just take a moment and remember that when we first put our feet on Shkakmikwe this morning, Mother Earth gave us every single thing that we needed. You know, we have that gratitude for that first breath of morning air that tastes just a little bit like spring, the sound of geese around us, a drink of cool water, food, the faces of our community and our families around us. How blessed we are. And to remember that as we give gratitude for the earth, that we live in such a way that the earth will give gratitude for us as well. I want to say just a word about where I come from. And on this map of what is now called New York State, I live just over the back hill from my neighbors at Onondaga Nation, to whom we owe an unpaid debt of land, of history, and certainly of knowledge of how it is that we care for the land. But you know, there is a long, long relationship between my Haudenosaunee neighbors and our Anishinaabe peoples, because we share this beautiful Great Lakes region. I think we could move that border just a little bit to the west too, to be inclusive. But the my Haudenosaunee neighbors and our Potawatomi people all have this relationship that came from long before settlement of saying, well, here we live, two different, very different cultures, living in the same place. We had to have an agreement about how it is that we would live together. And you probably know that agreement. It is here the Nagan Gebejik Emkwan, the dish with one spoon treaty. And a copy of this belt is in the leadership houses of Anishinaabe Confederacy, as well as in my Haudenosaunee neighbors. And what this agreement said is that in this beautiful land which we inherit is as a dish that Mother Earth fills for us. You see that shape of the birch bark feast dish in the center of the belt. And we are reminded that we all eat from that same bowl, and that while we are different peoples, we all have the same shared responsibility to keep it full and to keep it clean, especially thinking about keeping it full for everyone, for the human people and the more than human people as well. Because when it's empty, it's empty. And so I think about my colleague Neil Patterson of the Tuscarora Nation, who says that this is the oldest sustainability policy on the planet. And and so I see a lot of students and faculty here. So you study this on day one of your sustainability classes, don't you? Yeah, I thought so. We need to think about why that is, and we need to be agents of countering that erasure, and engagement with and illuminating the wisdom of our peoples to guide us into the future. Because, when we think about all of these gifts that Shkak provides for us every day, like a basket of berries, when you see this basket of muscadisman, and you would say, oh, well, in the Western way, we would say, well, these are natural resources. But to Native peoples, these are gifts. These are gifts from the berry people themselves, gifts from the land, gifts from the rain. And, even though we live in this world that is made of gifts, things that we have not earned or deserved or worked for, but come to us nonetheless unbidden like rain, we still find ourselves living in an economy and embedded in institutions that are relentless in asking us, well, what more can we take? What more can we take from the earth, even though everything has already been given to us? I don't think the question that we need is what more can we take, but the question we need is, what does the earth ask of us? What is it that we can give? What if this was on the top of your to-do list every single day? What does the earth ask of me? We would be living in a very different way. And that very question, how often do we even ask, what does the earth ask of me? Let alone, how do we answer that question? But of course, in our creation stories from all of our different peoples, this is the question that's raised in our creation stories. And then to say, well, how do we respond to a world made of gifts? And just as Gijkokwe, as Nana Bojo, as all of our great teachers told us, our responsibilities first are for gratitude for these gifts. And as human people, we know when somebody gives us a gift, we both feel that welling up of gratitude, but we also feel a welling up of reciprocity, that we want to give a gift back in return. And so also at the top of our to-do list is to say, well, what are our gifts? And how will we give them? I couldn't possibly introduce myself without introducing my teachers. And one of the, for me, most beloved teachers you see here is Sweetgrass, Wingashk in our language. And Wingashk, as a plant ecologist, I will tell you what you probably already know. This is a healer of land. This is a plant that comes up in broken land, knitting the land together. But it's also a healer of people. A healer of spirit as well. It's such an important plant in the material and in the spiritual realms. And when I think about why we braid sweetgrass, I feel like it's this reason that we braid one another's hair. Think of that relationship that flows between you when you're braiding somebody's hair. You're saying, I care that you are at your very best. I am invested in your wellness. And when we braid the hair of Mother Earth, when we braid Wingashk, that's what we're saying as well. This is my commitment, this covenant of care. And for me, I know there's so many different teachings about what the strands in that braid mean. But for me, as a Potawatomi woman and as a Western scientist, both dedicated to care for the land, for me, one of those strands in that braid is traditional ecological knowledge, our indigenous ways of being. But there is also a strand of Western scientific ways of knowing, the tools that can help us to magnify our caring impact. So those are two of the strands. But Western scientific knowledge and Indigenous scientific knowledge are both human knowledges. And so the third strand of great importance to me is that it's the knowledge of the plants themselves that we need to invoke and bring into our healing of land and healing of relationship as well. And it is those three strands that really make up the core of the book that you also kindly referenced. But because this is an audience full of so many students, particularly online. Hello, online students. I hope this is working better now. And I want to tell a bit of a student story as well, because this relationship between traditional knowledge, scientific knowledge, and the teachings of plants was not always clear for me. And boy, I am still learning and deepening my knowledge of what that might mean. But as a young person, I know that I was born a botanist. Those plants just sort of tugged on my sleeve from the time I was just a little one wandering through the woods. And so I had the great good fortune to grow up on the land, but the great misfortune not to be growing up within my Potawatomi community, thanks to Carlisle Indian School. I did not grow up on our reservation in Shawnee. Instead, I grew up in the Great Lakes in the Northeast, in our original homelands, where my teachers were abundant. And here's where that's where I wanted to go. And so when it came time to go to college to begin this journey of becoming a botanist, there was really only one place I could go where I lived, and it was to a college of forestry. And I knew that back in the day, this was in the late 60s and 70s, that I would be one of the only women at the College of Forestry. And I knew I would be one of the only Native people, probably the only Native person on the whole campus. And so I really wanted to be prepared for this. And so my first step in preparation was to get a red plaid wool shirt. I thought, that's going to do it. I'll be a forester now. I will be accepted. That will be my card. The rest of it, I wasn't quite so sure how I would manage. But I did know that on the first day of school, we were to have an interview with our professors. And so I wanted to be ready for that. And so I was going to show off my botanical knowledge to my botany professor. And so when he said to me, "Miss Wall, why do you want to study botany?" I said, "I want to know why goldenrod and asters look so beautiful together." You have this combination here too, right? On the roadsides in September, just stunning. And ecologically, those two species need relatively the same kinds of conditions, but one could grow over there and the other one could grow over there, but they don't. They grow shoulder to shoulder in this beautiful display of purple and yellow. And I wanted to know why that was. And I thought that was a pretty good scientific question. But my professor said to me, "My dear, that is not science." I said, "If you wanted to study beauty, you should have gone to art school." Well, I'm here now. I was, taken aback, of course. And so I also said, well, I want to know why the plants make medicines for us too, and how they do that. And I wanted to know why some plants really bend great for baskets and others just snap off in your hand. And he said, that is not science. That is not science. But tell you what, you take our classes and then you'll learn something about plants, he said to the girl who was born a botanist. That's why I look so happy. Yep, that I know it's not a mugshot, and that's still aspirational. But my freshman photo, taken right after that interview, you know, I just was devastated. I had no vocabulary to respond to him, to resist. After all, he was the botany professor and I was a freshman. And I thought, well, I guess I was wrong, those things that I thought I knew about plants. But I was so deeply distressed, I felt like I was knocking on the door of a club that did not want to let me in. Students, have you ever felt that way? I know you have. I know you have. And while this was a long time ago, many of our institutions of higher education still have this assimilative erasure of our knowledge. Rather than celebrating the knowledge that we bring, it is marginalized, set aside. And we need to work on that. We need to work hard on that. You know, my first day at higher education was, in a way, an echo of my grandfather's experience with education at the Carlisle Indian School. When he was only 9 years old, he was put on a train from Oklahoma back to Carlisle, where he too, in a much more disastrous way, was told to forget everything that he knew, that what he brought, his values, his way of thinking, were not welcome there. And there is a way in which education continues to be profoundly assimilative. And you know, we say that we live our ancestors' stories. They are always present and they're living in us. And I know in my own journey as a writer, as a teacher, as a scientist, I think so often of my grandfather's journey. When I went away to college, I went with the notion that the plants were my relatives, that they were persons, that they were our teachers. That's just the way the world was. But then I took the classes that my professor said I should take, and this is what an ecosystem looks like. I thought I'd wandered into engineering by mistake. This notion of nature as subject, as person, versus nature as object, and that the ecosystem was like a machine that we were supposed to be in charge of and fixing. In a college of natural resources, I also was introduced to these different notions of what land means. Land as capital, land as natural resources. I was in a college of natural resources. And when you think about that term, we use it all the time, just like we use sustainability, right? What does that natural resources mean? It means raw materials that we're going to extract in order to make something that we value. Not that the land is already intrinsically valuable. That land is property. Let's think about what that means. What does it mean for a parcel of terrain to be property? It means that you're in charge of it. You could take care of it, or you could wreck it. It doesn't matter because it's yours. You're in charge. You have dominion over that piece of land. Sometimes more gently, we think about land as ecosystem services, maybe close to what we think of as gifts. The gifts from the land. But in Indigenous ways of knowing, broadly speaking, that's not what land means. Compare, if you will. Does that sort of jive with what your experience of Western understandings of land is? I see a lot of heads nodding. Yeah, natural resources, property, yep. But what if, through the Indigenous lens, land is who you are? Land is identity. When you're inseparable from land, land sustains you. It's the home of everyone who cares for you. That land is not full of natural resources, but relatives are more than human relatives. That land is our connection to our ancestors, and to our descendants. That land is our teacher. It is our library. It's the source of knowledge. That land is the healer. It's the pharmacy of ills, physical, emotional, spiritual. because the land is inspirited, because the land is home. And never do we think about land as a place for which you claim property rights, all right? So that you can do anything to that land you want because it's yours. Rather, it's the place for which we accept moral responsibility because the land is sacred. I'd ask you to think about these ways of knowing, thinking about land as well. And which of these ways fills you up? Which of these ways is what you might, is the world you might want to live in? Because this is a choice of how we see land. So I am very happy to tell you that right down the hall from where I was told maybe I'd made the wrong choice and should have gone to art school, I came back many years later to the same institution where we today have the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. And I see Sarah Smith in the audience, who was one of our first proud alums of that program. So good to see you, Sarah. And as Sarah will tell you, I hope, our goal in our education, in our research, and in our community collaborations, but particularly in education, is to combat erasure, to highlight, to elevate Indigenous knowledge among all the environmental scientists and natural resource managers who we train. The goal is to not only support our Native students, but to support all of our students who are going to be environmental professionals to say, well, you shouldn't graduate until you know about treaty rights. You shouldn't graduate until you know about Indigenous knowledge so that you can be an ally instead of a roadblock. The model that one of the models that we tend to use is this model of two-eyed seeing, to acknowledge that most of our institutions of higher education act as if, teach as if there was only one lens on the world, the lens of the Western world, particularly the Western scientific lens. But this model, which was of two-eyed seeing, which was put forward by two Mi'kmaq scholars, reminds us that there are multiple lenses on the world, and that we need to highlight and learn to see with fluency through both of these lenses. To shift gears just a little bit, I want to tell you, as if you needed me to tell you, you know we are in trouble, right? You know we are on the brink of climate catastrophe, in the age of what has been called the age of the sixth extinction, right? The time for two-eyed seeing and bringing together these powerful knowledges is now. It could not be more urgent to have the guidance of Indigenous philosophy and pragmatism in caring for the earth. And in this time of trouble, this time of great change, was actually foretold by my Potawatomi ancestors. And I want to tell you just a tiny bit about that. I don't have time to talk about it in any great detail, but to say that our teachings of what are known as the people of the seventh fire refer to the history of our Anishinaabe peoples in our migration to the Great Lakes. And in these seven fires were historical eras in our people's movement and culture. And in those seven fire teachings, we were told that we needed to move into the Great Lakes to safeguard the sacred fire from what was coming to Turtle Island. And in each one of these fires, teachers arose who said, well, you need to keep on going because soon there will be people coming here who try to break the sacred circle of our nations. Keep moving. And we know that came to pass. Keep moving because there are people coming here who will separate us from our homelands, as we know came to pass. Each one of these fires foretold what would happen from our people, the time when our children were taken away from us, the time when our language had to go to sleep. And it is said that there will come a time in the future when you can no longer dip a cup into a river and drink? How long since you've dipped a cup into a river to drink? When the air will become too thick to breathe, and when our plant and animal relatives will turn their faces away from us. We know that has come to pass as well, no? And we are told that there will come a time when all the world's people are going to stand at a fork in the road and have to make a decision about the future of life on Earth. And one of those paths is all soft and green, and you could walk barefoot there. And the other one is a dead end, and it's all just burnt cinders, and you would cut your feet. Well, no mystery. We know what path we want to take, right? But the power of this teaching, it says that in this time, we can't just go dancing down that green path. The wisdom in this prophecy tells us that what we have to do is turn around and walk back along the ancestors' path and pick up those things that were left there for us. Pick up those things that were taken from us. Our teachings, our stories, our prayers, our language, our plant and animal relatives. And we are told that in this time of the seventh fire people will need great courage. They will need unity. They will face a great deal of suffering. But if each person picks up along that trail, wraps whatever they love too much to lose safely and carries it into the future, that we will be all right. That together, if we can pick up Indigenous ways of knowing, we can go forward to light the eighth fire of continuity of beautiful life on this planet. And our elders tell us that we are the people of the seventh fire. This urgency to know, engage with, embrace Indigenous knowledge, not erase it, is now. You know, I don't know about you, but in this time of great change and trouble, in a sense, I long for a teacher. I wish I had a wise grandma to help us know what it is that we ought to be doing in this time of the seventh fire. But you know, in our teachings, we're also told that Sky Woman left us our teachers in those seeds that she planted, in those plants that she left for us on Turtle Island. And indeed, the plants are among our oldest teachers. Viewed as persons, as wise persons. I mean, who else can take light and air and water and make food and give it away? Who makes medicine and give it away? There's wisdom, generosity, teachings among these beings. But you know, plants tell their stories not by with their voices, right? Not by what they say, but by what they do. And so our attention to plants in healing land, in healing spirit, in healing relationship can be a great guide for us. Because one of the important elements of Indigenous knowledge in epistemology is that we are not the only intelligence here on the planet, that there are intelligences other than our own that can guide us, that can teach us, lead us into the future, the ones who are far older than we are. And this idea about learning from nature, the land as teacher, is part of this so-called new science of biomimicry. A new science of listening to the land to figure out how we ought to live. This, in fact, ancient science, this ancient philosophy can teach us how to live, because an awful lot of biomimicry, contemporary science, is about what products can we make and sell based on the models of nature. What really interests me is what could the plants teach us about how we might live. And if we take seriously this idea that the plants are our teachers, how is it that, what could we learn about climate change if we were willing to listen to the plants? Because plants know what to do about climate change. They're not dithering in ineffectual meetings and debating tax structures, are they? They just get to work. Of course, maybe they are. Maybe they are, and we just don't know. But they just get to work. They can be the model for, I'm glad you used that word, transformation, that we need, because after all, plants have already converted to 100% solar economy. And maybe, speaking of solar economies, you've heard of the Branson Prize, the Virgin Earth Challenge. This is a $25 million prize to the engineer who can come up with a system that can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and sequester it away into the future. $25 million for this project. And this is important. We need new technologies while we are transforming to a fossil fuel free economy. And human ingenuity will be part of the solution. But we should keep in mind that there is a system that can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, store it away in the soil, right, for a long time, and it has so many more innovative bells and whistles. It generates oxygen at the same time. It engenders biodiversity. It builds fertile soil, and it makes us feel happy and peaceful, and it's called a forest. There's biomimicry for you. I say give the prize to the forest. Give it to the trees. Yeah. Because we know that plants are not putting CO2 into the atmosphere. They take it out, right? They store it away in these deep prairie soils and in the bodies of trees. And after all, what are coal and oil, right? But the bodies of our plant relatives, our ancient plant relatives. The plants stored away all of that carbon, keeping our atmosphere in balance, keeping it out of the atmosphere until we decided to rip up the earth and burn it all up in a couple of centuries. Plants have the sense to keep it in the ground. They have been sequestering carbon since the beginning. What do plants do when the climate changes? They grow faster. There's more CO2. They grow faster through the so-called CO2 fertilization effect. But make no mistake, that is a short-term feature, because pretty soon they run out of water. They run out of nutrients. This CO2 fertilization effect is not the way out. We have to care for the entire system in order to care for the plants. But we know that the plants aren't the ones degrading the soil. They build it. Plants don't degrade the water, right? They purify it. You cut down enough forests and the rain is going to stop. Look at what's happening in Amazonia today. We think about urban heat islands, right? Who is it that's doing the cooling in urban heat islands except for plants who are doing all that air conditioning without a single watt of electricity? Plants don't ruin the land, they heal it. They are our teachers. They are our teachers of restoration. But the sad truth is that if we look at the climate models and if we dig into the atmospheric budgets, if you will, what we know is that we have put too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at this point for the plants to get us out of that hole entirely. They can help a great deal, but we have to do more. We can't rely just on the plants to do it. Yes, we have to reforest. Yes, we have to replant deep soiled prairies that are great at carbon sequestration as well. But we have to have multiple solutions on the table as well. But what really troubles me is that so many of our climate change solutions are based in technology. I say, oh, we're going to invent our way out of this, or we're going to regulate our way out of this. Those are important approaches, but so much of our climate policy has not really invested in these nature-based solutions. And that's where we really need to go, to nature's inherent capacity to heal the landscape. But as I said, it's not enough. How is it that we can support the plants in doing their work and support the land in its own healing during this seventh fire time of transition? And when we ask, what does the earth ask of us? This is really what we're asking. In this urgent time, what is it that we are each called to do? And in this kind of word cloud here, maybe you see an answer that speaks to you. What is it that the earth asks of us in this urgent time? Is it regenerative agriculture? Is it doing good science? Is it doing transformative art that creates the political will to make the changes that we need to do? Is it ecological restoration? Is it education? There's so many ways to think about this. I'd like to boil it all down to a simple three. What does the earth ask of us? Raise good children who will care for the land, who will be good ancestors. Raise a garden. It's good for what is good for the land is good for the people. And raise a ruckus. This is the time to raise a ruckus on behalf of the planet. Be it in activism through organizations like the Wild Ones, so important in supporting biodiversity and carbon sequestration, capitalizing on the plant's abilities to do this, but also political action. Political action is essential for system change if we are to motivate a wholesale change and transformation. Because in this time of the seventh fire, we have many choices to make, and every one of them matters. Every one of those. So, if we take seriously this idea that the plants can teach us how to move forward, the real question then becomes, how are we going to be better students? How can we be better students of plants? Well, you got to show up to class, right? That means you've got to be in the presence of the teacher. You've got to be next to the water. You've got to be with the trees, listening to the birds. You need to be connected to place, right? And learn. What we're really talking about, oops, that got kind of messed up. What does the earth ask of us? Our attention, that we pay attention to biodiversity and to the plant world. One of I was going to call this my favorite statistics. Well, you'll see why it's not my favorite statistic. Paying attention to plants. Did you know that the average American school child, and really maybe just the average American, can recognize 100 different corporate logos like that? You're probably doing it right now. You're like, oh yeah, I can do all of that, right? We have a part in our brain which is designed to recognize logos. It's the same part of our brain which is evolved in order to help us recognize different plants. Right? But that part of our attention has been hijacked by corporate America. So the average American recognizing 100 corporate logos and 10 plants. And when you ask about what that list is, it includes Christmas tree. Okay, 9 plants. 9 plants, right? How are we to move forward with the teachings of plants if this is our demographic, right? We have to pay attention. We have to, again, acknowledge those teachers and begin learning the names and the faces and the gifts of the plants who are around us. This is our work. Right? And it's not just because I'm a botany professor saying you need to all go out there and learn scientific names. I'm not saying that at all. But know your neighbors. Know your neighbors so you can care for them, so that they can care for you. What does the earth ask of us? Respect? In return for all of the gifts that we have been given? There's so many ways to think about what does that look like. But, one of the things that feels so important to me as I think about walking back along that ancestor's path, as a culture, one of the teachings that I think we need urgently to pick up is this teaching, which to many of you is something you were raised with. This is how we live in the world. The honorable harvest. Let me just say for a second, if you think that land is natural resources, if you think that the land is really just a big old warehouse of commodities and you've got a shopping bag in your hand, right? Then does it matter how you take from the land? No, it's just a warehouse. But what if you take seriously the notion that the land is your relatives and that everything is a gift from your relatives? Right? You're just going to go into your relative's house and start rummaging through the cupboards and taking whatever you want? Better not. Right? That'd be called stealing, wouldn't it? So the honorable harvest is an unwritten protocol, familiar to many of us, about how we take from the earth. It is a policy of how we take from the earth when we think of the earth as our relatives, as our teachers. And it can be applied to berry picking, to medicine gathering, to firewood gathering, to gathering materials for baskets. And we're always told you never take the first one. It's a practice of self-restraint, because if you never take the first one, you will never take the last one. It shows respect to that plant nation that you don't simply go in and start grabbing, right? And in fact, when you come to the third or the fourth or whatever your cultural teachings are, you then have to ask permission. And, I can see on some faces like, you have to ask permission of a plant if you can pick some leaves? Well, in a Western world that thinks of them as property, that's just silly. But if you think of them as your family, of course you have to ask permission. And then you have to listen for the answer. And here's where that braiding of traditional knowledge and scientific knowledge really comes into play. How do we listen for the answer if it's okay for us to pave a meadow and turn it into a parking lot? How do we listen? How do we get permission to do that? We have to use our powers of observation, intuition, we have to ask permission, and then we can use also the tools of science to be able to say, is this population healthy enough for us to be able to harvest, etc. Right? There's lots of ways that we can use these things, and if we're granted permission, we go on to the rest of the protocol, but if we're not granted permission, we go home. With an empty basket, you don't take unless you have permission, unless your demand is worth the lives of those beings. That never factors into land use planning or zoning, does it? But it should. And if we are granted permission, you only take what you need, never more than half. You always leave plenty for everybody else. You give gratitude, and then you give a gift. You reciprocate for what you have taken, what you have given. You might carry those seeds someplace else. You have the gift of mobility, right? You might weed around them. You might write a check to your local land conservation organization in order to protect more habitat for those beings. There's so many ways that we can reciprocate the gift. That's what we mean when we say, what does the earth ask of us? How will we reciprocate that gift? I'm told that there is an even older part of the honorable harvest, and that is, take only that which is given to us. Have you heard that part too? That's harder, I think, to try to ascertain, because there's so many pressures that tell us, that mix up what we need, what we want, and what is given to us. But there's a couple things I'm pretty clear about, and that is that coal from mountaintop removal is not given to us, right? That tar sands oil that displaces people, poisons the land, poisons the water is not given to us. But the sun is given to us every single day. Not without its costs, to be sure, But couldn't we think about the honorable harvest, this ancient protocol for consuming, from taking from the earth? Couldn't that be the guidelines for a new energy policy, leading us into a new green economy inspired by the honorable harvest? To begin wrapping up here, another way that we can think about how do we show respect for the living world is encoded again in this idea of personhood, that our more than human relatives, our persons, our teachers. And you might think of that as just sort of a philosophical construct that's a spiritual matter. But I want to say that it has real resonance and the potential for transformation of the way we are living. As you look at this photograph of this beautiful river, this is the Wanganui River in Maori territory in New Zealand, right? And did you know that the Maori for decades have stood up for the rights of the river as a person? That river ought to have a say in whether it gets dammed or not, whether it's polluted or not. The river belongs to itself. It's a sovereign entity. It's not for people to decide to use it as a sewer. They have used their indigenous ways of thinking to try to provoke a whole new way of law, of environmental justice law. And did you know that just a few years ago they were successful, and the Wanganui River today has the legal rights of personhood in New Zealand? That people from both the government, federal government, and Maori leaders have a say in speaking for the river, trying to discern. This idea of respect for nature not only finds its way into this law, but the same nations who have indigenous-led nations like Bolivia and Ecuador have brought into their constitutions the rights of nature. The rights of Mother Earth are in their constitutions. We can't even get an equal rights amendment in ours, right? We should be listening, right? We should be listening, we should be learning. And in fact, these same coalition of nations have brought before the United Nations the Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth. I had the privilege a few years ago of speaking to the General Assembly in support of this declaration. And I just want to tell you a tiny fragment of the story. I thought, oh my gosh, speaking to the General Assembly, it looks like just like you think it does, right? And but what I noticed is that there were quite a number of empty seats, and you can read whose seats they are, right? So I asked later, I said, well, tell me about this. And they said, oh, well, that's just how it works here. Folks vote with their feet. If they're not in favor of something, they don't come to those meetings. And you know who all those empty seats belonged to? The global north, our country included. So it will be a long movement in the United Nations to recognize the rights of nature, but it's on its way with the changes, the transformational changes that can happen. And you know, when we think about the personhood of nature, the rights of nature, I want to think about the way in which we talk about nature in the English language and how we talk about our living relatives in Indigenous languages. I suspect many of you are Indigenous language learners, right? And deep into and teachers, and deep into the philosophy that is held by our language. How do Indigenous languages factor into this transformation that we need? I want first to say something about, you've heard of linguistic imperialism, right? Linguistic imperialism being the way that when colonizers arrive, they rename everything and they try to erase the language of the people who are already there and replace it with their own, right? You're familiar with this. I would like to propose that one of the most insidious forms of linguistic imperialism exists in this little word right here. Looks innocuous enough, doesn't it? You only say it probably 100,000 times a day. But let's think about this. In English, when we look at that maple or the salamander or the strawberries, we might say, it is blooming, right? It is singing. In English, if we don't know the names of the beings, we call them it. That's just how our grammar is, right? And as we saw a little while ago, we mostly don't know the names of our relatives, right? And so in English, we just say it. As a scientist, I might have spent 5 years studying, learning from a particular plant, and then I write my scientific papers and I have to call it it. It hurts. Like, you're not an it. You're my teacher. But English doesn't let us say that. Certainly scientific publications don't let you say that. So let's think about this. When we say it, what if I said, it is sitting in the front row? What if my grandma came in here and brought a plate of cookies? And I would say, it's wearing an apron. Would we ever say that? Of course not. I'm sorry. I disrespected you, didn't I? I made you into an object, into a thing. I demeaned you. I stole your personhood by calling you it. Oh, we would never do that to a human person, but we do it to every other living being on the planet. What's with that? We are objectifying nature, aren't we? Doesn't it make it easier to conduct a dishonorable harvest if you call the world it? Right? If it's just stuff, it reinforces that idea of natural resources, not relatives. This is a powerful word. As I began studying Potawatomi language, one of the things that gave me a great challenge, continues to, is conjugating all those verbs, particularly because our language has a grammar of animacy. We have animate verbs and inanimate verbs, and most of our words are verbs. You hear a blue jay with a different verb than you hear an airplane, because one is alive and one is not. So we always are giving honor and respect to the living world. I suspect that's true in your language too. What a difference. What if we could speak of the living world as our relatives, not as commodities? Is it any wonder, honestly, that English is the language of global capitalism? I think not. So, a modest proposal. Could we start to heal this rift between human people and our relatives with new pronouns? Could we learn to speak a grammar of animacy? And I worked for a long time with a wonderful language teacher, my elder and mentor, the late Stuart King, who was a great help to me in this enterprise. And we got to talking about, could there be medicine from our languages that could help heal the English language of its grave error in turning the living world into objects, into commodities. And so one of the ways that we thought about that is, well, what is our word for a being? Not just a being, not a thing, a being. And it doesn't matter what species it is, it's a being. And Stuart came up with the word Bimadiziaki, a person, a living being of the earth. And I was so grateful that we had that word, but I don't think that English speakers are going to take Bimadiziaki and put it into their everyday speech. But at the end of that word is the word aki, which is the word for land, for earth. And at the end of that is that little sound ki, which is largely unclaimed in English. What if we substituted for saying it to the living world that cold, objectifying, dehumanizing, disrespectful way? Could we say of that maple, Ki is giving us the gift of sap, dripping into the bucket, not I'm going to go tap it. You see the difference? It's so different, isn't it? It's a way to speak respectfully of the living world. And if we were speaking of those trees as beings, as our relatives, it would be harder to make a clear cut, wouldn't it? If it's pretty easy to exploit. If you are reminded of their beingness, it sets a control. And of course, if we're going to have rights of nature and rivers with persons and wild rice with personhood and all of the wonderful examples that are blossoming around the world, we're going to need to have a plural form of Ki as well. And in English, we already have just the word we need. Let's just add an N. So when the geese come home as they are today, right, we can say, welcome back, kin. We're so glad to see you. What if every time you spoke of the living world, it wasn't as a commodity, but as your relative, as your kinfolk? We would live in a different world. And we have the power to change our language and our thinking. Whether you use these pronouns or not, to adopt a way of thinking that is of kinship and reciprocity. I am going to skip right ahead here to, the last thing. Do you have patience for a story? Sorry, I'm going a little long, but it's a good story. It's an important story. As we look at those trees and think of everything we've talked about them as our teachers today, I want you to think for a second about these amazing plant teachers. They're brilliant. They're gentle. They're generous. They're creative. They're sacred beings who just give and give. They're trying to help. They are doing their best to save the world against human folly. They're making forests. They're making soils, they're making food and medicine, and they are trying to hold back climate change. But instead of showering them with gratitude and respect, we cut them down, dig them up, and poison them in an act of betrayal so profound that it today threatens the continuity of life on the planet. What do you suppose it will be like? How will it feel in that moment when people wake up and realize that they have ground our sacred teachers underfoot? We live in mythic times, don't we? And so I want to leave you with a mythic story that was shared with me by Tom Porter, a wonderful spiritual leader from Akwesasne, who gave me permission to share this story. I turn to this story over and over in times of crisis. And I was sitting at the breakfast table with Tommy at Ganajohalege at his home, his restored home in the Mohawk Valley, and he took out a deerskin bag of stones and began to tell me the story, remind me of the story about Sky Woman's grandsons. Sky Woman who came here, and her grandsons. Her daughter became pregnant with these twin boys, the grandsons. And there was a struggle. Even in the womb, these two boys, these two twins, were arguing and elbowing each other. So much so that one of those boys said, I am tired of this. I want my way. I want out. And his brother said, there's a way that happens. Um, but the brother was so impatient that he cut his way out of his mother, and she died. And the grandmother raised those two boys. And those two boys continued to struggle, to be in conflict, always competing with one another, wrestling, fighting, all sorts of stories about them. Really, what they did is to embody the notions of the forces of creation and destruction. One of the twins, for example, wanted to make the world easy for the people who were to follow, and so he made blackberries. And filled the fields with blackberries so that people would have that delicious fruit. But then his brother came along and put those darn thorns on them. So there's lots of these stories about the duality of creation and destruction. The struggle between these twin forces of creation and destruction, which are always with us, were to be decided at last in a game. To decide the fate of the world, they decided to match their skills at what we know today as the Peachstone game. The players use a set of so-called stones, often peach pits. One side of the seed has been painted white and the other side is blackened. The player shakes the bowl, tosses the stones into the air, and only when all the stones have turned one way or the other would a winner be declared, and the fate of life on earth would be decided. If all the stones came up black, the brother named Flint would prevail, and destruction would be loosed upon the world. Should they all fall white, then the world would continue under the generous hand of creation. The boys played. They played and they played all day without a winner. They tossed the seeds for hours, back and forth and back and forth, and with every single throw, two boys gambled with the future of the world. Would life continue as we know it, or would all be lost? It's such an ancient story, and yet could not feel more contemporary as we are today, gambling with the future of the earth, with continuity of life. On and on they played, all day, all night, until the glimmer of light at the eastern horizon warned them that time was almost up. They could make only one more throw. As the pink light of dawn colored their faces, the stones flew into the air for the last time, and they began to clatter one by one into the bowl. The first one came up black, and the next, and the next, and the next. All the stones were black until there was only a single seed still hanging in the air, tumbling and spinning on its way to the bowl to join the others. All the other beings in the world watched in terror as humans gambled with the continuity of life. And at the moment when all life hung in the balance, it is said that all the members of creation, the trees, the berries, the grasses, the birds, the four-legged, the many-legged, the no-legged, all drew in their breaths as the last stone tumbled. And together, all of creation gave a mighty shout. Its force caused the human foolishness to be overruled. The power of their voices turned that last stone over as it fell into the dish. The color of trillium blooming in the spring, the color of mother's milk, of moonlit snow, the color of a polar bear. I've tried to imagine the sound of that shout, the roars, the panting, the swishing of grasses. In my imagination, I feel rather than hear their voices, large and small, chirps hoots, buzzes, howls, flutters, scrapes and squeaks, leaf flutters, needle whispers, spine quivers, buds swelling, seeds bursting, roots pushing, spores popping, and the vibration of the membrane in the smallest microbe, all coalesced in a great wailing wind, so cohesive in strength and direction that it turned the stone, spins it around, holds it poised in midair, and sets it down, life side up. It was the mighty shout of creation that saved the beautiful world. But we're gambling again. The plants, the birds, the salamanders, the starfish are all trying to make a mighty shout. But we've weakened them to the point that their voices are threadbare and faint. It's a raspy little whisper that can barely be heard over the roar of the bulldozers. All this time, they have stood for us, and we have paid them with betrayal, with our silence, as destruction reigns. Now it is we humans who must give the mighty shout. Mi'u, miigwech bizindawieg. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you. Miigwech. 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 Miigwech, friends, that sounds like a mighty shout to me. Thank you. If we still have time, anyway. Oh, you've got it all set. All right.
No, I don't know all this fancy stuff.
All right. I'm told we have a few minutes for questions, so if there's something on your mind, and I'm sure there is, be happy to chat together. How are we doing this?
And I'm looking for Dr. Heddle or Brad, just to have some help. I can run, but it's not on. Okay. All right. I'm a-coming. I saw a hand go right up. Very excited. Do.
Only easy questions.
Well, this probably isn't a question so much as it is a comment. Someone had made a comment earlier about mosquitoes, and everybody kind of chuckled. But I don't think people understand that if the mosquito goes away off this earth, so does everything else.
Oh.
Thank you. All right.
My daughter Dawn is Menominee and other nations, and she died this last June. But at the age of 46, she had been, up until the day of her death, she had been the chair of the lawyers for the the Yurok tribe in California. And they have lost, that tribe and many around them had lost what they live for, and what their religion is about, and their economy. And that was the salmon, because we as colonial people have built these dams which slow down the water, and the salmon can't, in that heat, they get disease. And she is unusual in that she has not only a regular law degree, but a one from Oklahoma, an advanced law degree, which even very few judges or anybody has. And she convinced the businesses around around this area, and already, I mean, the people have been working for this for a long time. When she died unexpectedly of cancer with sepsis on top of it, she was working from Wisconsin with her health that we didn't know was as serious as it was. The tribe, she was going to take a job closer to home, and the tribe wouldn't let her go. They said, "We want you can do it remotely, because you have trained the other lawyers and taught them not only the technical skills, but how to convince others of what we need in ways that are gentle but firm." and you relay that so well to us. And I just, what we've been doing for the memorials with her, and what the tribe, when they asked us as family to their memorial for her, they stressed the personhood of convincing people gently but absolutely firmly. And she taught us, or I had been, many of us have been working on our in our local state natural areas. You know, we learned, I thought it was a new ecology thing, that we would remove the brush and let the trees survive better. And anyway, I found out from her when she spoke to the United Nations COP, two of those, Egypt most recently, a little more than a year ago, and the one before that. And she said that the most important thing she said is that we will not have a healthy earth if all of us don't pay attention to what the indigenous people have been doing for years when they were allowed to on land that they could return to. Anyway, it was a lesson. Her life has been a lesson to so many, and I wanted you to know you were not alone in what you're teaching. And I'm leaving you a book or two about her life and what the people there said about her. And it pretty much what I said, which I learned.
Thank you. I'll make sure she gets that. Thank you.
Miigwech, and mother to mother, I want to say thank you. And the stories that you have just given us are a way of answering what does the earth ask of us. To say, what is your daughter's gift? And she gave it. You know, we say that an educated person is one who knows what their gift is and has learned how to give it, right? And she's an example, and you're an example. And if we can each use this story to say, what is my gift? What will be my legacy in the urgency of this time? So thank you for that story that lifts us all up.
Hi. I am a longtime listener of the podcast Ologies, and I understand that you have done a podcast episode with her, with Allie Ward, and I just want to know what was your experience with Allie Ward?
Oh, I just love her. Do you know Ologies? Yes. I say many heads, yes. Oh, I just adore it. Yes, it was a dream come true when she phoned up and said, would you like to talk about mosses? Like, if you know me, somebody said, would I like to talk about mosses? So we had a blast. She is, if you don't know the Ologies podcast, it is, you learn so much, but it's also really funny and witty, and you get to meet all these amazing people that she finds and shares. So thank you. That was just so much fun, and I'm a faithful listener, as I can tell you are too. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
I think, hello.
Over there.
Hi.
Yeah.
It's so strange to talk to you. Thank you for this opportunity. I just had lunch a couple weeks ago with a woman I just met that's a friend of my niece's. She's a professor at the University of Minnesota and is a botanist, geneticist. And she said, a little fact that was really kind of cool, that the DNA that we share with lettuce, you know how much percent of shared DNA we have with lettuce? 43%. I'm just like, yeah,
Kinfolk.
Thank you. That's it.
Kinfolk. Yep. Only they got that great gene for photosynthesis, and we did not.
Hi.
Can you wave? There's so many mics. Where? Oh, back there. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I find it fascinating that if we lose one mosquito, that it can alter all of our lives, including the kins.
Could you hold the mic a little closer? I want to be sure to hear you.
Hi. I find it fascinating that if we lose one mosquito, it can alter and change our lives, including the kins. And I was wondering why that.
Why if we lose mosquitoes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, every being has its gifts and its roles, right? And mosquitoes, in their great proliferation, right? And the fact that they are rich in protein, after all, they are feeding on our blood. They are rich protein packages flying around. They feed the birds, right? If you love warblers, if you love any birds, they must have mosquitoes. What about the peepers? Have the peepers started singing here yet? Or the toads trilling? They haven't at home yet, but they rely on that whole food chain of which mosquitoes are a part. Everything is connected, and yeah. So. But I also want to honor the curiosity in your question to say, if one kind of mosquito was gone, would everything fall apart? One of the brilliances in ecosystem structure and function is that there is redundancy. There's redundancy. Well, maybe if you can't eat that mosquito, those other ones will be there for you, because some years are going to be bad for that one and some are going to be good. So there's redundancy built into the system, but as we lose more and more of those parts, even the redundancy is gone. And so that means that the resilience of the system, its ability to bounce back and adapt, is greatly diminished and puts everything at risk, even mosquitoes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I am going to have to cut to the very last part of our evening, looking at the time. So many of you have stayed. past the 7 o'clock, so thank you. Thank you so much for that. But I do want to go ahead and invite our Dr. Shannon Davis Faust up. We have a couple of items that people have would like to honor you with before we call the evening to a close. And I just walked all the way up here with that. But I want to make sure that, oh, I apologize, there's even more coming up. I just said Shannon, not just, but also Shannon. So please, you all come up, and I'm going to step aside, although I'm going to ask Hallie to come join me.
Could I ask Wild Ones members to stand up, please? Wow. And associated people with Wild Ones, family members too. It would be our honor if you would join our community. We would like to give you this lifetime membership to Wild Ones.